Okay, good morning, Dad. Today is Saturday, November 16th. We did not do an episode yesterday because you were traveling, so
Mhm.
welcome home.
Good to be home.
Um, and let me start you. Let's do a good news Saturday. Is there any good news out there? Tell me there's
Yeah, actually, there is for once. I'll try to do my best to um, to take the shine off of it, but I have to admit that it's good news that Tulsi Gabbard was nominated for the position of DNI director. I mean, Tulsi Gabbard is a true dissident. You know that because Hillary Clinton called her a Russian agent. I remember actually seeing that tweet back then a couple of years ago. She's on the Ukrainian kill list. And just a few weeks ago, it was discovered that she was on a terrorist watch list and you know, um, uh, couldn't fly within the U.S. Inquiries were made, and then they were, she was taken off of it. But somebody at a very high level had put her on a terrorist watch list. Why is that? Because she's a true foreign policy dissident, and actually going way back during the Syrian war, she began to point out the lies, the false flags, and so forth. And spoke very forthrightly, very courageously. That's back when she was a congresswoman from Hawaii. And then also she's been the same about, well, the Russia hoax, but then also about Ukraine. And she used to be critical of Israel, of Zionism and of anti-Semitism hysteria. Unfortunately, she flip-flopped on that. And now she sounds like Ben Shapiro. And that's very disappointing. That's a black mark. I think it must have been a calculated decision that, if I'm ever going to rise through the ranks, if ever going to have find myself in a position where I can wield power, I have to bow to the Zionist gods. And so she did. But, so that aside, she is a remarkable person, a true dissident, and Trump has appointed her. Hasn't appointed her yet, but, he's nominated her to an important position. She oversees all these intelligence agencies, and she's responsible for actually, I think, providing the daily report to the president. So she has his ear, and he can, that's a very, very influential position, clearly.
who's the current person in this position?
I don't know. I'm sorry, but I just don't know.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
so they always say that I saw Twitter explode that all over that everyone's upset about Tulsi Gabbard deployment because she's a Russian asset, that we
Yeah.
have a Putin puppet
Right.
that is now in the halls of power in the United
Yeah.
States.
Right.
So immediately I was like, okay, I guess this is a good thing. Once you see these
Right.
people start crying Russian asset, but is
Yeah.
there anything to this at all? What do they are they basing this on anything? This Russian
Oh
asset,
no,
Putin
no,
puppet?
no, 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 no. You know how it goes. There's absolutely nothing to it. It's
Well,
just
I
that
figured we
she
just
actually,
have to.
right. She just goes against the narrative, told the truth. If you just tell facts about Ukraine, if you talk about the Istanbul Agreement or Minsk II or whatever, things, historical facts, you're accused of being a Putin puppet. That's just the way it works, because you're not supposed to talk about these things. Or you mentioned that Azov is, a neo-Nazi brigade. Well, no, you're not supposed to talk about it. One time you could, and even articles appeared in the New York Times about these things, but you can't talk about them anymore. And if you do, you're a Russian asset. That's what that all it means, that she speaks the truth.
Okay, so it's based on nothing, absolutely
It's
nothing.
based on absolutely nothing, of course.
It's
Yeah, I mean,
I know, but it's
yeah, I
amazing
know, right?
how they say it with such conviction and so many people, and you
Yeah,
in it. And I think that's the game they play. We'll keep on saying this, and then you'll
yeah,
have to adopt a position like, well, okay, yeah, there's probably something there. There's
yeah,
something
right.
shady.
Yeah,
That's what
it does work. I mean, it probably you repeat something, often enough, it just becomes true in the minds of a lot of people. They think it's just a fact, and then occasionally I'll go and watch a mainstream news show, and they're talking about things, and it just it's clear that they inhabit a different reality. All these facts that they're talking about are not really facts, but if you listen to them for a while, like myself, I start to get drawn into it. It's wow, because it's just also natural and assumed. There's just no controversy. These are all facts, and we all
Right.
know it. We're all grown up people, and fortunately, I've had a lot of exposure to the truth. I know that there's an alternative version of events that's very solidly grounded and actually supported by most of the world. But most people don't, and they start thinking, they just, well, how could you challenge this? All these very serious, authoritative people, they just know this. And,
Right.
you would be very embarrassed to walk in and mention something alternative, as another, "Oh, well, I heard there was something happened, out of here, you imbecile."
Right. Right. They're very powerful people, obviously smart people, and then you hear it on repeated on the news. You feel like, well, this
Again
has
and
to be
again.
true. Again and
Right.
again. Right.
Yeah. Now, I want to emphasize about the Tulsi Gabbard nomination that this is only the beginning. She's not appointed. Clearly there are every last foot soldier in the deep state army is going to be marshaled against her. They're going to do whatever they can. I think John Bolton has already demanded an investigation. They're going to do whatever they can to torpedo, this nomination. And if by some, she manages to become appointed, they're going to continually try to undermine her. That I think just goes without saying. So this, it's just that the battle has begun. It's not that the battle has been won. But I have to tip my hat to Trump for doing this. His every last appointment up until this one, was just horrible. If anything, it was even worse than what we would have had under Harris administration. But this nomination of Tulsi Gabbard goes a long ways to make up for the horrible earlier appointments he made. There's actually kind of a historical precedent for her appointment. I think you can also point to Matt Gaetz. He's also a real dissident. It's not a foreign policy appointment. He's been nominated for Attorney General, which is a domestic position, but his foreign policy positions have more or less mirrored Tulsi Gabbard's. Well, anyway, back in 2016, the vast majority of Trump's nominations were terrible, but there were two exceptions, and one of them was General Flynn, who was a real foreign policy dissident. Not on Iran. He had some sort of bee in his bonnet about Iran, just like Trump does, but on a lot of other things, Russia, and I think even Israel to some extent. So he was a real dissident, but they went after him, and he never even got appointed because what they did is, someone in the CIA or whatever recorded a conversation he had with a Russian ambassador and then leaked it. And it was used as evidence that he was somehow conspiring with the Russians. This is the beginning of the Russia hoax. So there was this hysteria already. And it was perfectly innocent. It was his job to have, to make these connections and talk with these different people. But it was somehow yeah. He was doing the right thing. Yeah, right, exactly. You're supposed to talk to ambassadors. That's why he's there. But it was used to actually, to torpedo his nomination. So he never got appointed. And then the other one was Rex Tillerson, who was, in fact, appointed as Secretary of State. And I wouldn't describe him as a dissident, but he was not a neocon. He was not an ideologue. He was a realist. He's a very practical man. And I guess there's something that came up early in his tenure. People within the State Department were trying to get him to attack, one country or another on the basis of human rights. And he was saying, well, this is silly, they're not particularly guilty of this or whatever. But later some memo was leaked. Somebody was trying to explain to him, no, you don't understand. We use human rights as a weapon to attack our adversaries. So we all know that, but it was kind of funny. It was fun to see them saying that openly, well, not openly, it was leaked. But anyway, he lasted like all of 3 months or something, and they pushed him out. So Trump did actually, try to put forward some people we could describe as dissidents, people who were not part of the establishment, but the establishment crushed them both. So we're going to have to see what happens to Tulsi Gabbard. The important thing, of course, the most important thing is that Trump needs to stand behind her. He didn't really stand behind, General Flynn or Rex Tillerson. And that's unfortunately, maybe he'll be different this time. Maybe he understands that he needs these people and he can't, he needs to protect them. We'll see.
Okay. Dan, can you push your mic back down a little bit? It's a bit loud. I feel a little
okay. How about like that? Is that better?
Yeah, maybe a little bit to the side, or we'll see. I think that.
Okay.
Okay. So you think that there's a good chance that this nomination won't go through? That the deep state will put the screws on Trump and just tell him you can't do this? We see the Twitter sphere.
Right, or they'll start leaking all kinds of stories, which will be spun in a certain way, and they'll do whatever they can. If there's any fragment of a skeleton in her closet, they'll pull it out. You know what they do. Like actually, Matt Gaetz, I think they went after him. There was he was accused of some sort of sex crime, right? And he was investigating whatever, but there wasn't any evidence. But. They're capable of anything,
right? But the fact that he wasn't found guilty of these crimes hasn't stopped anybody on Twitter. I see it all over the place.
Bring it on, right? Right. He's some kind of perverted Russian asset or something.
Right. So basically, we should just, if we see the Twitter mainstream media get upset, then we know that Trump is doing the right thing. That's basically what we want to see.
They've been right. They've been very happy. Like Ben Shapiro has been very happy with all his nominations up until this point. But I noticed that, like for example, the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, which is a pro-Jewish, pro-Zionist organization, condemned the nomination of Matt Gaetz.
Well, why? Because he is not a Zionist, not very pro-Israel?
Actually, I don't know. I don't know if he said much of anything about Israel. Being in the Republican Party, he probably is on record as being pro-Israel. But, I mean, it's really silly stuff. It's just that, he didn't support, there was this anti-Semitism bill. He said, if it was supposed to go, which was put forward in response to the student protests. So they're trying to really crush the protests, really crush criticism of Israel. And he pointed out, he said, that, look, this bill, if you read it strictly, it would actually condemn the New Testament, as an anti-Semitic document. And that's what he said. And then, the ADL just completely twisted, that incident and claimed that he was accusing Jews of being guilty of the killing of Christ, or and in some it wasn't anything close to what he said, but they twisted his words and tried to make it out to be just because he opposed the anti-Semitism bill, then he clearly must be an anti-Semite. So actually, I found out about that, and it just made me think even more highly of him. Interestingly, he's really, quite an independent-minded person. Another thing is he's been consistently for decriminalization of marijuana use. Yeah, so he's a true dissident. He's a true independent thinker. And sometimes, maybe he says crazy. I am sure he says some off the wall things or does some crazy things that I might regard as kind of wacky. But what gets him in trouble is that he dissents on some important issues, and and he's right to dissent on them. But again, that's Matt Gaetz. That's
Yeah, it's really amazing how powerful the Israel lobby is. How they all have to bow down. We can have dissidents about just end the Russia war, or just to change anything domestically. But it's just that one thing. You can't get somebody in power that is truly anti-Zionist, that says that this has to stop.
Oh no,
that
what
Israel's
close.
Wrong.
Right.
Even just saying the anti-Semitism bill we shouldn't pass something like that because it has a huge infringements on free speech. We should be
Right.
careful.
Right.
That's too much, and it's like you
Right.
can't say anything. It's it's
Yeah, no,
extraordinary.
yeah, it is. I was going to say that actually within the Democratic Party, it's the same on Russia. I mean, I've noticed in those votes, like for on Ukraine aid, there was not one dissenting vote within the Democratic Party, not one. So you do get dissenters on Israel. It's a very small group, but maybe 20 out of, 200 or so, but not one on Russia. You actually get you get quite a bit of dissent on Russia within on the Republican side, and you do get some dissent on Israel. Again, it's even tinier, within the Republican Party, but there is a little bit.
Right, Rashid Tlaib, Bernie Sanders. There's a few
You're right
on the Democratic side.
Right, right.
But it's amazing
Yeah,
how
nothing
little,
on Russia, nothing.
right. So do you think that basically what it sounds like is that we are gearing up for a battle between the deep state and the Trump administration in many ways. Like if we look at the Trump administration through the foreign policy lens, it doesn't look great, especially with Israel, hawkish towards Iran,
right.
hawkish towards China. Some
right.
changes with, potentially with the Ukraine-Russia war, especially with Tulsi Gabbard in there. Maybe we can really see an end. And it does sound like Trump really does want to end this conflict, and many
I think
people
he does,
in his,
yeah.
right. And it sounds like there are many people in the administration that feel the same way too. So maybe we could see something there.
Right.
But if we look at it more, his appointments in the lens of Trump tackling the deep state, it does seem like there is something there, that there is some idea that we have to, for example, we never talked about this, is Elon Musk and I can hear a little, is there something playing back there? I can hear.
No, not at all.
Oh, it's weird. Okay, I could hear some feedback. But,
really?
Anyways, Elon Musk and Vivek are supposed to be in charge of DOGE, right? Department of Government Efficiency. And it sounds like a drain the swamp type of position. I think what it is maybe I'm speaking and it's coming through and I'm hearing it through the mic. Could you push your mic back even further or turn down the gain or something? It seems like maybe we got.
I don't even know how to turn down the gain, but
okay, we'll figure that out later. So, anyways, do you think that it's possible that this time around there will be a drain the swamp type of thing?
Well, there's an effort. I think it'll fail. I'll be honest. I'm very pleased with the nomination of Tulsi Gabbard, but I don't think she's going to be appointed. And if she is, I don't think she's going to last long. I very, very much hope that I'll be proved wrong, but that's what I expect.
Who will take her out?
Oh, you'll see everyone, including the other people that Trump has appointed. They all regard her as just, as the enemy. And the bureaucrats have ways of fighting. They can be very imaginative. We saw what they did last time with the Russia hoax. Who knows what it will be this time? But they'll take her out. I think they will. And then the drain the swamp, and even like the government efficiency. Okay, I know I've seen other presidents go in swearing like Reagan back in 1980 that he was going to cut government. Again, he was going to abolish the Department of Education and the Department of Energy. They're still here. And I'm afraid that, I wish Musk and Vivek, all the best, but I'm afraid that government is probably going to be bigger when they leave than, when they arrive. That's my very cynical, pessimistic prediction. But we'll see. Obviously, Trump has some good intentions, but it's going to, even with the wiliest, most sophisticated president, that you could ever imagine, it would be a very, very difficult fight. And I think, again, Trump has good intentions. He's got some good friends, but I don't think he's really up for the fight. And a lot of these people that he's appointed, they're going to work also to undermine Tulsi Gabbard. Let's be honest. They won't do it openly, of course, but I bet they'll wink and nod and urge their subordinates to take her out.
You really are cynical, aren't you?
Yeah. Well,
There's
I think I call it just realistic. I mean, I've just seen it. I've seen, people go in, a lot of these, uh, an outsider, so-called, takes, wins the office of the presidency, and there's all this hope and this idealistic talk, and then nothing changes. I've just seen it again and again.
so what's the point even? Should we even try to? I mean, we should voice our
I
dissent.
think, yeah, I think at this point, there's really, I just don't, it doesn't matter who's president. I think more on the domestic front. You have to say, for example, during his last term, some things really did change under Trump. Not foreign policy, that only got worse. But things like immigration and education policy, I think I mentioned last time, they really did change. And I think, like Matt Gaetz might actually be successful. He's got an important position. He's really doesn't, they're going to go after him too. But I think there's a better chance that he will succeed.
So what is Matt Gaetz's position? What is he being nominated for?
Attorney General.
Okay.
Right. So he's going to be the head of the Justice Department. That's a very important position. And there's already a lot of hysteria about him. He can make a difference. So, again, I think that we will see some real changes on the domestic front. I just think the blob is too powerful. That's my prediction. My hat's off to Trump, for nominating Tulsi Gabbard, but I don't think I think it's like she's just going to be meat thrown into the lion's den.
Really?
Yeah.
And you think that Elon Musk and Vivek, they may want to try to make cuts, and they'll find that they're faced a new creature. This isn't like running a private company.
Right.
All of a sudden, you want to cut people, but you're getting stonewalled left and right, and nothing gets done. And you think that's what's going to happen? They'll try to do things, and then they'll just be met with just like, well, no, you're not allowed to do that, and then there's some type of process that'll take 10 years, and will drag down the road, and then nothing happens.
These people know how to delay and obfuscate and throw up all kinds of obstacles.
And it's just the deep state doing this to protect themselves. There's so many people that are relying on this government
here
money,
a lot of it, we're just talking about just the plain old bureaucracy. The deep state, I think we're talking about in particular the military and intelligence communities. And I probably Vivek and Musk are not going to go into that territory. They're going to be dealing with the domestic bureaucracies. But those bureaucracies, I wouldn't call them the deep state, but they know how to survive. They know how to expand. They know how to increase their budgets. They've been attacked before, and they always come out on top.
So if Tulsi Gabbard, she's in charge of all these intelligence agencies, do you think she will, try to gut them, reform them? Like
she may. Well, she doesn't actually have the authority to do that as DNI. She doesn't have direct authority over the agency. She oversees them, and she collects information from them, and then provides reports to the president, which is again very important. But she wouldn't be able to gut an agency or to reform the CIA or anything like that.
But someone like Trump could, right?
Yeah.
If he really wanted to.
If he really wanted to. Yeah. I mean, he could try. I agree with John Mearsheimer. He's not saying that Trump is stupid, but he's not very sophisticated, and he's not very disciplined. He's not wily. The thing is, he just kind of says what comes to mind. And that's what drives everybody crazy, on the other side. He's going to be surrounded by a lot of very wily, sophisticated people who just know how to play him and know how to delay and whatever and make sure that nothing ever happens.
We'll see. I mean, I guess it depends who he's really surrounding himself in the inner circle. But I just imagine if Tulsi and Trump try to take on the intelligence agencies, I mean, they'll do whatever they can.
Oh yeah, they
have.
They have
assassinations, right? They can pull all types of things.
Right.
So,
if you can remember, it was back in 2017. I think actually, Trump started to. It became clear that he he and the intelligence agencies were at odds with each other. And Trump began to, make efforts to, he's started to fight them. And it was Senator Chuck Schumer from New York that said, boy, Trump, he doesn't know what he's getting into. It's like, you don't take on the intelligence agencies. They have, he said, they have like 6 ways from Sunday to get back at you,
Right. Something like 10
like
ways to sundown or something
yeah,
like that.
yeah, right, exactly. But so anyway, yeah, because everybody knows, like, yeah, don't mess with them. Like they've got dirt and they got all kinds of levers they can pull. They can, they know how to fight dirty. They know how to win. So it's going to be a tough. It's going to be a
lot of
tough
that
fight.
happens where intelligence agencies blackmail people. I mean, people
I think
always make these.
yeah, it's something I hadn't thought about, but then recently, the last couple of years, I read about a lot of those cases, and I think it happens more often than we realize. Yeah, that they collect information on everybody. They get dirt on anybody that they can, and if that person begins to be a problem for them, they just give them a call or send somebody to their office and say, that incident, that time you spent with that woman or whatever, we've got some interesting pictures here and
Yeah,
I mean, I think they
that's the
really
thing.
do. I think there's no question they do that. And the Mossad is famous for doing that. A lot of people have argued, and I'm sure they're right, that, oh gosh, again, names always slip my mind. Who was the guy that had the kind of like the pedophile island and
Epstein.
with Epstein, right? That was basically a Mossad operation. It's just like every room had a camera, and so they bring in these rich and powerful men, to have sex with underage girls, and they would film it, and then they just they kept all that. They kept that film, and if they ever needed that person to do something, or if he began to stray and do something that was opposed to the establishment, they just very discreetly notified him, hey, remember when you were at the island? Did you know there was a camera in your room or what? And
Really?
yeah, that's
So
that's what I've heard, and I think that's probably true. I mean, it was
yeah, I
clear
mean,
that Epstein had Mossad connections, and his wife in particular. I think his wife was, I think her father was a well-known Mossad agent.
really. So
Yeah,
you think that's what a lot of it what
yeah,
it
I think
was,
that
and
that's
then
basically what it was all about. You're right.
that's crazy.
Yeah,
It is one of those we have never talked about the Epstein stuff, you and I,
yeah,
but it is one of just those things that it's just such a clear that there's some conspiracy here. Something was going
yeah,
on, and it is
yeah.
covered up, and
Well,
we
I'll give
can't
you an
talk about it.
example. When he was finally arrested, I was surprised that he was arrested. It was so clear that the guy had been violating the law for decades, and that he actually ended up in prison. I remember saying to other people, it's just like, oh, he's not going to last very long in prison. Like 2 weeks later, they declared, oh, he committed suicide. But unfortunately, the camera wasn't working at the time. But
Really, yeah.
it was obvious that they just offed him because they said, we can't let this guy go to trial. You could spill the beans, and so
When you were a kid growing up, did you have that feeling that there was this shadowy cabal, that there was this
no,
elite and there was this
no,
blackmailing? Because it seems
right,
it almost seems common knowledge now. Everybody knows, like,
yeah,
yeah, there's a deep state. They do what
yeah,
they want. They kill people. They blackmail each other. They got dirt on each other.
yeah,
They're
right,
spying on everybody and everything. It's like we just kind of know that, and it's the new reality. We've come
yeah,
assimilated to it, and
right.
that's just the world we live in today.
Yeah.
But it,
Well, I think it actually did exist back then, but it just wasn't nearly as large or extensive as it is now. And so it's a combination of two things that people are becoming more realistic. They learn not to trust their government, and which is good, but also the government itself, in fact, is becoming more corrupt, and which is why they've stopped trusting their government and stopped trusting mainstream media.
right. And now we're kind of just seeing this. I describe it as an allergic reaction to some of these appointments, like Tulsi Gabbard or Trump
Yeah.
himself. And that's just kind of a sign of the deep state reacting. What we're seeing
Ah,
is the deep state. When people are so upset about Tulsi Gabbard, it's like, I think the average American is like, why? What's the? It's like, oh my God,
Yeah.
she's a Russian ass, and she's talking to Putin nonstop. No, that's just in this one world.
Hmm.
That's
Yeah, but
occupied by these
those are the
people.
people that hold power, though. That's the thing.
Right. So, how is the rest of the world handling this? The appointment of Tulsi Gabbard, or the
Well,
nomination, I should say, of Tulsi Gabbard,
yeah,
and
I think in Europe you basically get the reaction of the Democratic Party elite, and that's what I've heard is that already there are European leaders and mainstream in media outlets that have said, yeah, basically, yeah, they Trump has just appointed Putin's agent. You get the same thing. It's clear. I think that like those people, they've been getting all their information, from the liberal establishment in the U.S. Again from like MSNBC or just from the Democratic Party itself. And I think that's one reason why they were so shocked by the Trump election. They were just assuming that Harris won because everybody they talked to and all the news reports they looked to, they were also optimistic because they were getting very, very slanted news. They're just like, again, our own elite, and they're being fed the same kind of news. And they live in that same reality, so their reaction to Tulsi Gabbard's nomination was identical to that of the establishment here.
Mm. But they can't really do anything, right? It's really
Oh,
the
no.
U.S. that holds the cards. It's really the battle's going to be between the deep state, and Europe is just going to. They're just bystanders watching.
Yeah, right. They're just
And
vassals, as we've talked. I mean, really, it's not an exaggeration. They're just vassals. It's actually it's shameful. They should be having their own independent news sources and so forth, but they don't. They just um, their news, everything comes from the U.S. The news, information, instructions, they just are issued from the power center, which is in the U.S.
yeah, it's pathetic. Wake up,
Yeah,
Europe. Come
yeah,
on, think
really,
for
wake up.
yourselves.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, I'm going to pivot a little bit. I was just
yeah.
in the last episode, we were talking about what would happen if the U.S. got involved directly in a confrontation with Iran, because we are seeing an administration that does seem to be more hawkish towards Iran. And then we made some statement, and we said it pretty just openly and confidently, like, oh yeah, if the U.S. and the Iran are in direct conflict, this is a conflict that Iran would win, and it would be a humiliating defeat for the United States. And then I realized just saying that, for many people that heard that, it almost sounds blasphemous. Like the
Uh-huh.
idea that Iran would beat the United States, the greatest power in the world.
Uh-huh.
I've seen Top Gun. There's no way, right? Like this is, and I think that I'd like to just maybe explore that concept a little bit more, because I think so much of my view of the world has just been shaped on what's happened the past 2 years. And when I look at, because that's when I've really started talking to you about these conflicts, and I've just been having revelation after revelation that the United States is really not equipped to fight these wars. What we see in Ukraine and what we've been watching with Israel, the interceptors, hypersonic missiles, drones, this new warfare. But I'm wondering if I'm just putting too much credence on just the past 2 years. Should I be looking at it more holistically and looking at it that the United States does have incredible capability? It was top dog for so long that this idea that for some reason that we can't, the United States can't take Iran, that's silly. The United States should be able to take on Iran, no problem. Is that, am I, are we looking at it wrong, or are we being accurate? I want to make
I
sure
think
that I'm not saying
okay.
anything
Right.
absurd, because people were upset when I posted a clip out there like, you are crazy. You guys are idiots. You don't know what you're
Yeah,
talking about. I want to,
yeah.
sorry, let's
Right.
explore it a bit.
No, we're not idiots, and we do know what we're talking about. The U.S. has a massive military, but it was a military designed for dealing with weak second and third world countries like Iraq in the 1990s. And, it was devastatingly effective at that. But we live in a whole new world. There are new technologies, and we have not adapted to them. Iran has. Now, you can see, you're saying that you're wondering how Iran could possibly stand up to the U.S. Well, what's happened in the Red Sea in Yemen? The Houthis don't have a like 0.5% of the military strength and or industry that Iran has, and yet the U.S., who declared that they were going to put an end to the the Houthi attacks on shipping in the Red Sea, they declared that many months ago, and they failed. They utterly failed, and the Houthis have continued to fire missiles without impunity. And just the other day, they apparently struck an aircraft carrier, and a high-ranking U.S. military official says. He says it's amazing the kind of stuff they have. It's just like the missiles that they're firing are becoming increasingly sophisticated. And look, if the U.S. military, if the U.S. Navy cannot defeat the Houthis, who are just they're the very definition of dirt poor people, living in a barren desert, how are they going to take on Iran? Iran is so much more powerful, has so many more missiles, has a very, and they have prepared for war with the U.S. for decades, because the U.S. has been threatening them for something like 20 years. So they have been building these very massive underground complexes, bases that are buried deep within mountains. And they have thought very carefully about, what the U.S. strengths are and what their weaknesses are. And they have calibrated. Their military is designed to fight the U.S. Our military is designed to fight, a weak third world country from 30 years ago.
Okay, well, that's embarrassing. Sobering.
Yeah, no, I think it's really true, and it's not an exaggeration. I mean, you can just, and you say, well, we've got, Top Gun. Well, our top fighter jets, like our F-35, so the Israelis have them too. They couldn't get anywhere close to Iran with them. They fly over Lebanon all the time in Gaza and destroy civilian neighborhoods. They do it with impunity there, but they couldn't even get close to Iran. They got within maybe 100 kilometers and they had to turn around because the Iranian air defense radars were already detecting their presidents and locking in on them. So what if you have, this fantastic aircraft or air force? You can't even use it. You cannot fly over them and bomb them. And Israel just does not have the missile arsenal that is even close to matching the missile arsenal that Iran has.
And neither does the United States.
No. Well, again, though, the United States would have to fire its missiles from naval platforms. They would have to be ship-launched missiles, and they've got some. But again, look, they use those. They've fired hundreds of cruise missiles at Yemen, and what has it done? It hasn't even slowed down the Houthis. And again, the Houthis are just like the dirt poor cousins of the Iranians. So what can they do?
Well,
and then the other part of it is that because of the U.S. president, all these bases that they've established in places like Iraq and Syria, all those bases are sitting ducks for the Iranian missiles, and they demonstrated that. Remember when they assassinated Soleimani, under Trump. Trump issued the order. It was one of the most worst things that he ever did. But he was assassinated, and in retaliation, the Iranians, very carefully, there was a very carefully calibrated response. They fired missiles at U.S. military bases, and they hit them precisely, like certain, but they gave warning to the U.S. So, all the soldiers went into the barracks, and they didn't strike the barracks, like they would hit a watchtower or some facility which was known to be empty, but they did it. They say we can strike within just a few meters of our target. And that was a demonstration. Basically, it was a shot across the bow to say that if it ever comes to a shooting war between us, we're taking out your military bases. They could take them all out. And if there are any ships that are at all close to Iran, they can sink them. And the thing is, the U.S. military understands that. And I think that's why they have been very reluctant to be involved in any kind of conflict with Iran.
So maybe somebody would say, well, with the Houthis, the United States, we're not really going after them. If we really wanted to, it wouldn't be a problem, but they're not worth their time. Right? Is there some other thing that the United States can do.
We've been going after him for months, and it's been an embarrassment for us. Let's be honest, though. The whole world's looked at it, and the whole world's laughing at the U.S. You think if we could take him out, of course we would, but we can't.
And it's not for a lack of trying. It's not.
Oh,
that...
no. There have been, I think there was, even just a couple of weeks ago, there was another strike on Yemen. But especially during the first couple of months, there were regular strikes on Yemen. Cruise missiles, I don't know how many dozens or hundreds of cruise missiles were used.
Okay. And so I think it was the USS Abraham Lincoln that was fired upon by the Houthis. From my understanding, it was a mix of missiles and drones. And my understanding is that they said they shot down the drones, but I heard that actually some missiles actually hit the USS Liberty, and that's why it's on its way.
That happened. Yeah, right.
It's on its way back to San Diego.
The U.S. has not acknowledged that, but I think there's a very good reason to believe that that's what happened.
Right. So it's headed back to San Diego for repairs or whatever. We'll see. Mm-hmm. I think they're going to try to hide it, but that's a game changer. So if the U.S. is going to try to wage any type of war against Iran, you think that it most likely have to go through their Navy, right? The U.S. Navy. And the U.S. Navy just cannot... they're just big floating tubs that can be struck with drones and missiles.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Actually, Iranian officials have said that when the U.S. Navy is right off the coast of Iran, the Iranians relax. Because the Iranians know these are sitting ducks, and they know that the Americans know that they're sitting ducks. So, if we got them right off there, then obviously they don't have any intention of attacking Iran, because Iran could immediately sink the whole fleet. But when the fleet goes away like 1,000 miles off into the Indian Ocean, then they get nervous because they're saying, well, they're moving their sitting ducks out there out of range. But that's what's happening. So,
well, how would the U.S. hit them if it's not through the Navy?
Well, they could. Maybe they don't have to go 1,000 miles. It would. They probably. There are Tomahawk cruise missiles that can travel over 1,000 kilometers, maybe even 2,000 kilometers, and so those could be within range. And then they do have their bases in the Gulf states, and they could launch. But maybe those. They've always been for now. Yeah, they've always been free to use them, but actually recently, the Gulf states have begun, expressing doubts, and like in the recent attack, they did not allow Israel or to fly over their countries, their territories, and they might not allow the U.S. to launch an attack on Iran. Iran might say, "Look, if you let them do that, we're going to strike those bases, and maybe we'll strike your oil refineries too." They know that Iran could do that.
Right, but the U.S. doesn't care what these countries say. I mean, we're not supposed to be in Syria or Iraq to begin with. We're there.
Well, they do care what. Okay, yeah. So, but they do care what, like UAE and Qatar says. I mean, we've had a long relationship with them. Clearly they're starting to shift. Move towards BRICS, but the relationship is still there. And actually, I think the U.S. does have to pay attention to what they say. They don't want to be kicked out of those bases. I mean, they've simply occupied, parts of Syria and Iraq. But they do have an agreement with the UAE and Qatar and these other Gulf states.
Do you think it's possible then that, all these Iran hawks that are being put in the Trump administration, do they potentially are aware of the situation and maybe they're adopting the hawkish position just to make sure that they keep the money flowing from AIPAC and to keep side of the Israel lobby?
I don't think they understand the situation. I think they're just, they're watching CNN and Fox News and I think they're just deeply misinformed. Maybe one day they'll get a briefing and they'll be shocked. And they may have trouble believing it. And we hope they get an honest briefing. Unfortunately, a lot of these briefings are corrupted. In many of these agencies, the high-ranking officials understand that the Congress, the president, and the members of Congress, they want to hear. There's certain things they expect to hear. and so they actually just tell them what they want to hear. I mean, that's really unfortunately what often happens, and so they are never really informed of the reality. And I think that's part of the explanation for just our completely disastrous Ukraine policy is that a lot of even what Biden was hearing, he probably even thought he was given a rosy picture. Yeah, we can destroy Russia, we can whatever, and because again, our agencies are corrupt. I think there are still good analysts in those agencies, but the analyses that they actually perform are often never reach the ears of people in power.
Okay. Well, yeah. So what kind of information are they being fed then? If it's just fake information, are they
Yeah.
being told that, yeah, Iran's defenses were completely destroyed? Are they believing that propaganda? Like all the S-400 systems wiped out, Iran
Yeah,
is
I
now
don't,
sitting down.
again, I don't know.
Like,
I don't know. I think, again, like, most of these people, um, members of Congress and so on, probably just believe what they watch on TV. And um, I think it is possible, that the truth has, I think it's even likely that the truth has filtered through to the White House and the State Department. That, we could see it, for example, on um, the the issue of missile restrictions in Ukraine. Right, there was this push, and a very obvious push, to try to lift the restrictions so that Ukrainians, well, actually, we know it's really not going to be the Ukrainians, it's going to be NATO technicians, could fire these missiles deep into Russia. Um, but, so we even had Keir Starmer and Anthony Blinken go to the White House together, to convince Biden. And Biden said no. Now, I don't think it's just because Biden is a principled guy, but I think that it had been explained to him probably many times so that even he understood you can't do this because the Russians will retaliate and it'll be really, really bad. And so it's clear that the truth does get through on some very important issues, to some of the decision makers. Um,
it's just shocking to me that we're trying to pick all these fights, or we're heading towards all these conflicts
yeah.
that we
But
clearly can't win.
yeah, well,
And
but it has been clear, I think, all along. Um, and going back to even like Trump's first term, there were real pushes, of course, to have war with Iran. After the Soleimani assassination, and then the Russian or the Iranian retaliation. There was a real push from people like John Bolton to actually just go to war and start bombing Iran. But we didn't do it. And I think, then and then more recently, there are all these efforts to again, by Netanyahu to spark a war between, well, first Israel and Iran, and then to draw on the U.S. It's clear that that's what he's trying to do. But the U.S. is, I think it's obvious, and especially in the first Iranian attack back in April, right? They actually communicated with the U.S. and kind of worked things out. So Iran would do this kind of demonstration and nobody would be hurt and whatever. I mean, the U.S. was, I think, completely in favor of that. They just they did not want the situation to escalate. Netanyahu did, but the U.S. did not. And I think it's because, again, that the Pentagon understands very well that a war with Iran would be disastrous for the U.S. And
okay, so
they've managed to get that message through. Now, the
does that
thing
give
is,
us some hope that
well,
there won't be
yeah,
a
but
war?
unfortunately, with like this new, these new officials that Trump's appointing, they're just they're so insane on Iran that maybe those brakes will no longer be applied.
Talking about Pete
Maybe,
Hegseth?
yeah, right. I mean, he's just a complete nut on Iran, and
He does seem to have some idea that there are some serious problems with the military in terms of interceptors and missiles. So I think he's maybe aware that the U.S. military is not in a good shape, and maybe that would hold him back. Kind of what I'm afraid is that maybe, well, I mean, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I guess probably bad is that maybe Hegseth might take the position of more just trying to revamp the U.S. military and start working on correcting all these problems and, see if he can. But I don't want the U.S. military machine gearing up for war. I just don't want
Yeah.
war. I want us
Yeah.
to,
Yeah. Well,
to get
I'm
along.
afraid again. It's just there are a lot of comments that he and other Trump nominees have made that it's just completely, well beyond the pale on Iran. I mean, they're so I think there's a real chance. Again, there's been a sane faction that has been fighting the Iran hawks. I think going back 20, 25 years, because there's been this continual push. There's obviously been a group, mostly of Israel-allied neocons, often, actually dual citizens within U.S. government that have been pushing for war with Iran for a long time. And there are others the realists have been fighting them for 2 decades. And we'll see. Fortunately, the realists have managed to stave them off. But these new nominations, which I'm sure will become appointments, could tip the scales in favor of the Iran hawks.
And then if that happens, war with Iran, then we
Yeah.
just lose. We just
Yeah,
lose.
yeah.
Base is gone. U.S. Navy ships start sinking.
Well,
But then it gets scary because then America
Yeah.
gets really angry, and then
Right,
then what are we
right.
going to do? We start
Yeah.
nuking people.
Yeah, I don't know. Because again, how did we deal with 9/11? We dealt with it very, very badly. There wasn't any real, it was a time to reassess our foreign policy. How did this happen? We just decided they attacked us because of our freedom, and then we need to bomb Iraq, which is completely insane. It was just an insane response. So I'm afraid that we'll probably see an equally insane response if there is a kind of a disaster in the Middle East, in connection with Iran.
Right. And well, do you think that this could bring down the U.S. empire, the U.S. government as we know it, if we do get involved in a direct war with Iran and it goes poorly?
Yeah.
Let's say an aircraft carrier sinks to the bottom of the ocean
Yeah.
and the Red
It
Sea,
would.
and
Oh, yeah. It could be just say the beginning of the end. It may again. I don't think the empire is just going to fold up its shares and go home. That's not going to happen. In fact, like we're just saying, I think they may lash out. Things may get worse in the short run, but it could be the beginning of the end. It's just that it's like the first time where we really bumped up against reality, and we couldn't hide the reality from, the general citizenry. They've been told all along that we're just, we're the awesome top dogs, and there's just and Iranians are basically just a bunch of fanatics running around the desert. And then this is going to be a real shock. Again, I don't think the response is going to be healthy, but it may be like the beginning of an awareness that we're not who we thought we were.
do you think war with Iran is basically inevitable? That's where
I
we're
wouldn't
heading.
say it's inevitable, but we're on a knife's edge now, clearly, because again, Netanyahu is and his entire cabinet they are hell bent on war with Iran and bringing the U.S. into it. And the Iranians, who have just, again, have displayed remarkable restraint over the years and decades, really, have shown that, well, enough is enough. They're now fighting back. They understand they don't want war, but they understand they may have to have war. And, we may get one.
And really, all these U.S. conflicts in the Middle East, can we really tie them all to Israel and Israel's control?
Yeah,
Like
not
there's,
with it. Yeah. I mean, it's all about Israel. I think we would have made peace with Iran a long time ago if it wasn't for Israel. We obviously had this initial conflict with them. The takeover of the U.S. embassy and the hostages that were held for 444 days. Though, of course, the Iranians point out that was actually a response to the CIA-sponsored coup in the 1950s. But anyway, that was a long time ago, and we could have the Iranians have offered, held out their hand, offered the peace pipe, many times since then, say, okay, let's bury these differences, but we have remained unrelentingly hostile. And I think it's because, okay, there was this initial hostility over the embassy incident, which is understandable, but it's eventually the neocons, and the Zionists, which were pretty much the same thing within U.S. administration. They saw Iran as the enemy, because they are the great power in the region, the only one that really can oppose Israel. And that's why Israel feels that they need to take him out.
All right, I'm going to ask you a question, and I know you're going to hate this question, but what would America be like if the state of Israel was never created? I mean, it just changed everything in the world.
Yeah,
It changed
yeah,
everything for us, and
right.
it was something that, it shouldn't have ever happened.
Right,
This never should have happened to begin with.
right.
To create this ethno-supremacist state, this Zionist entity, which was a secular movement to begin with.
Yeah, right.
It's would we just all be singing songs together and holding hands and
Yeah, I don't know. Well, it would have an effect both on, on American society because again, like, Zionism has become such a powerful force within Protestant churches in this country. There would be different changes there, I'm sure. The most obvious would be in U.S. foreign policy and its relations with the rest of the world. There's no question that our standing in the world would be much higher, and our relations with all kinds of countries, particularly in the Middle East, but not limited to the Middle East, would be much better. Yeah, that's really all I can say. There's probably, I don't know, those counterfactuals are hard to answer sometimes. I'm sure that the differences would be even deeper. I think, if we could actually see that, look into a crystal ball, I think we would probably be shocked by how different it is. Those are just things that come to mind immediately because it has been such an important part of the U.S. consciousness, not just foreign policy, but just domestic consciousness for such a long time. I think it's probably warped our thinking in all areas, in all kinds of realms, more than we realize.
right. Warp is the whole world. I wish we could get into the
Yeah.
multiverse and
Well, it's
see
interesting,
a
in
parallel
Europe,
universe.
we have Joseph Borrell, who's going to be stepping down. He's kind of like I don't know what his title is, but like the foreign minister for the EU. Um, but he just, recently was saying that, boy, we have to stop this war in Gaza, and Lebanon, because it's really hurting Europe too. It's just like because we're basically admitting that we're complicit in this, and the rest of the world is reevaluating Europe and looking at Europe as a bunch of hypocrites. He's admitting this. This is a problem. We need to stop this.
Right, I saw that.
Yeah. Now his solution was pathetic. He said, "Well, so we have to impose sanctions." Say, "Well, okay, yeah, good." We're just saying, "Yeah, cut off no more trade with Israel." That could really get their attention. He says, sanctions on products that come from illegal settlements. That's it would be like 3% of trade or whatever. So it's a step in the right direction, but it's just meaningless, really. It was just verbiage. And then the woman that's going to replace him, he's been terrible, like they all are, but she's even worse. She's just a total nut on it, on all foreign policy issues. I think the former prime minister of Estonia. Yeah, she basically wants NATO to just go ahead and attack Russia and start to wage economic war against China. It's going to be this is who they picked as their foreign minister, and I'm sure she's a Zionist, an extreme Zionist, like all the rest
Is
of
there
them
a
are.
democratic process in this at all within the EU when they pick these
No,
appointments?
well, the EU is not at all democratic. It's really just it's a bureaucracy. I mean, there is a European Parliament, but they don't really have any power. So it's just every time, like these countries, when you become part of the EU, you actually surrender a lot of sovereignty. The EU, the bureaucrats in Brussels claim sovereignty over the right to review all your laws and to, actually, impose fines if you're not in conformity with EU regulations and so on and so forth. Yeah, and they
Okay, so
decide their own foreign policy, and if you don't toe the line, then you're in trouble. Viktor Orban is held out against them, but they've openly said that we need to take out this guy, and he's held out bravely. And I really hope that he continues to, and that others join him. But they have ways of making Hungary hurt, and they've already done things, imposed fines and denied them subsidies and that kind of thing.
so much for Western democracy then, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
really,
this
yeah.
is
Yeah.
so the it is kind of interesting that we look at your Western Europe and the United States as, this is the bastion of democracy, freedom, and human rights, and then we're
Yeah.
supporting this genocide in Gaza. Right.
Right.
And it's so hypocritical, especially when you juxtapose it against the Russian conflict.
Right.
Everybody's really condemned it. And then in, I
Yeah.
think, was it 3 weeks, Israel killed more civilians than both Ukraine and Russia combined.
Yeah.
It's this,
In
and
two
then not a
years or
peak.
something.
Yeah,
Right.
in 2 years in Russia and Ukraine,
Right.
Israel in
Right.
3 weeks killed more
Right.
civilians, and not
Right.
a peak from the Western community.
Yeah.
And then
Well,
all
also, I
talking
mean,
about
but yeah, they're also
democracy.
hypocrites directly about Ukraine. I mean, one thing it just struck me, I think, yesterday. The Western powers have been floating these ceasefire ideas, and usually it's some sort of, okay, we freeze the lines and we agree um, that Ukraine won't join NATO for a certain number of years. Again, it's absurd. Russia will never accept it, whatever. There are a lot of different versions. And one thing that I've noticed is that they never mention the rights of Russians, of ethnic Russians and Russian speakers. And that's one of the requirements that the Russians have put forth, from the beginning, is that their rights need to be respected. And you would think that the Europeans are supposedly all about minority rights and whatever, that they would be concerned about that, and they would make that part of their solution. It just obviously doesn't even concern them. They couldn't care less if Russians are persecuted, as they are, terribly persecuted within Ukraine, but also within like the Baltic states too. Russian speakers they've been deprived of all kinds of rights, and
Even
but the
voting rights, I
European,
heard.
yeah, right. But Europeans couldn't care less. They're just total hypocrites. I just despise them, really.
Okay. Well, hopefully we'll see them voted out. It does. I hope the tide's turning. I just feel, especially, I think that's maybe one of the positives of Trump winning the presidency is that there is more freedom to speak out against the Ukraine war now. People kind of
Yeah,
can see the direction it's going. And
right.
I'm noticing it already on Twitter. People are saying, no more money to Ukraine. We're done with
Uh-huh.
this,
Right. Well, it
So
even had
hope,
an effect in Europe. It's really funny, but there was some sort of European official. He might have been a European Parliament member. He said that, uh, um, yeah, maybe we should reduce the amount of money going to Ukraine. We couldn't say this before, but now that Trump's been elected, we can say this. He actually just went out and made this statement. It just shows again it's a vassal mentality. It's just like our masters back home are allowing us now to say this. Yeah, masters back in the United States.
yeah. Okay. All right, Dad. Well, I think let's end it there then.
Sure.
Okay. Have a good weekend.
All right. You
Okay.
too.
Bye bye.
Bye.